The Stop Killing Games movement advocates for the protection of video games as art and consumer products through improved consumer rights and long-term access to video games beyond official support, instead of them becoming unplayable. This is exactly what happened with Ubisoft's title The Crew. No solutions were provided, such as community tooling or offline patches, and as such, it is now currently unplayable. Its sequel, released in 2018, which received an offline patch on the 24th of April 2025, likely due to public pressure, 7 years later shows that this is possible. That shift reflects what this movement stands for, ensuring future games do not vanish because official support ends. Pirate Software, through a series of videos, streams and tweets, has misrepresented the initiative and its importance, deflected responsibility for their part in the initiative's performance, and abrasively targeted Ross rather than leading constructive dialogue. Now you might be wondering, but Jack, how do you know what's happening out there when you're stuck inside your own video game? And how are you doing Margaret's voice? Well, to answer the last one, I don't know. To the first, the cacophony of bullshit happening out there in your world is quite frankly unhinged and is in need of reining back. I want to stress that this initiative's focus is on future games and not existing games. Ideally, it would extend to all games. But the initiative is sensitive to the practical challenges with long-gone studios, lost source code, and so on. Speaking out like this isn't something I do lightly. I've made a similar video once before out of respect for developers, players, and the industry as a whole. But the misinformation and behaviour on display here makes it necessary that we stand together and unfortunately call it out. So here I am. First, I want to address Pirate Software's proposed solution to instead inform the customer at point of purchase that they will be getting a license to the game. That's not a solution. That doesn't stop issues like Concord, where it lived for 2 nanoseconds and players that bought it can no longer play it. Yes, there are people that want to do that. What you've actually done is create a clause that absolves any responsibility from developers or publishers to do what this initiative is asking for: consumer rights, preservation of art, respect. This is instead an excuse for companies to be ignorant of the problem and kill games anyway. Pirate Software's point about it being vague is a strange hill to die on. By his own admission, details of laws are worked out with lawmakers. It's a conversation multiple people need to be at the table for. This is getting those people to that table. This isn't law, this is a proposal to put before governments to get it through the door, to work out the details fairly, and then create those laws. To discuss this with all parties' best interests in mind before making laws that are completely unfair for anybody. There are reservations against providing community tooling, and I don't understand why this is. Yes, there can be a development cost if you don't want to release things like server binaries in their original form. But that's something that can be mitigated during the development of a game that depend on official servers. The main reasons it's not done now is because you don't need to. But what about the abuse of games' back-end logic before end of life? As the movement states, this comes into play at end of life. This functionality doesn't even need to be there or unlocked until the game's final patch. It doesn't matter how it happens, only that it does. The exact route is down to the developer or publisher, which might make it seem a little vague, but it's because it doesn't ask for publishers or developers to do it a specific way, only that it is possible when end of life comes, by any means. This is again semantics. Pirate Software's example of League of Legends could easily be supported through end of life, through community tooling, stripped down binaries, or tailored server kits, without fully exposing proprietary infrastructure. distributed as part of sunsetting. Core, proprietary or license code and money making are two of the reasons against doing this, but this is something that can be accounted for with a wind down crew or T's and C's, which basically say, don't let people monetize it. Games are decompiled all the time, meaning that people can see the code within. That doesn't suddenly mean the studio doesn't own it anymore and can't jackhammer people who abuses the IP in court. We've seen companies legally battle people for less. But suddenly this is unreasonable or overly laborious to track legally. God forbid we create jobs in this day and age. Cheating is another argument against the proposal that doesn't really hold up. It's end of life, and unfortunately that no longer is the concern of the studio and publisher. Stop Killing Games does not require studios to maintain support past providing a route for self-sufficient play. Cheating is not their concern anymore, unfortunately for you. The argument that games are developed in a specific way that accounting for this would block new ideas doesn't make any sense. Even long-dead MMOs have been resurrected through, for example, API adapters written by the community, allowing network calls to work with private servers or simulate a single-player experience like the single-player Tarkov mod. Now, indie games is where I can see this being a little bit tricky. They obviously don't have the resources or finances to always make these kinds of concessions. However, like I've said, under this movement, it is a viable option to pass the burden on to the community for help, as long as you're providing the necessary resources to the player at end of life. The truth is, a lot of multiplayer indie games are peer-to-peer, which means that a player in the lobby is the server and would never be a concern of this proposal. But of course, that's not always the case. Depending on how a game is architected, it can be time-consuming and resource-intensive, which is why community tooling and freedom to implement solutions themselves at end of life with T's and C's in mind would transfer that load from the developers onto the community, which is a very viable option under this proposal. Now, we can sit here and dive into Pirate Software's personal history like I've seen other people do, but I don't have an interest in doing that because it doesn't really hold any weight here. But what I can't let go of, and now this is to you, Thor, is how vain you've been. Some concerns you've raised have been genuine and come from a place and passion for games and game development. However, it's incredibly conceited and spoken from the mindset of someone who believes how they see things as absolute. The lack of humbleness fosters a community that shrugs off cooperation and diverse ideas and prevents opportunity for personal growth. From what I've seen of your coverage from Stop Killing Games, and I've watched it all, even the VODs that you did delete, the way you put your points across comes out in a similar rudeness that you claim others have done and are doing towards you. It's extremely abrasive. The points that you expand on aren't the points that need elaboration or hammer home why exactly you are against this initiative and why you see it as a negative for the industry. There was a sort of apology, but not about how you targeted Ross or about anything meaningful. Nothing has been learned, and you've only doubled down since arguing about semantics and being disingenuous with the details instead of doing what you claim to be passionate about. Not once have you offered opening up a dialogue and working with Ross to make the initiative, in your opinion, better or more succinct. You even disregarded Ross's requests for dialogue, claiming he slighted you after you slighted him. To claim that this movement detracts from more important issues is to suggest we don't bother at all, which, if we did that, nothing would ever change. When talking about why this isn't true preservation of games, stating it's making a game live on in a way that doesn't make sense, you're projecting your personal bias on preservation. If a player wants to replay a game they used to play with their parents or for a LAN party, or to just run around a world that used to be filled with thousands of players, or so that they can just play it with their children one day, then that is up to them, and that is the beauty of preservation. The freedom to do exactly that. I acknowledge that part of your reservations are to do with law and the development complications, but arguing against it and then doing nothing towards it is evasive, feeds into it, and leaves game studios and publishers that take advantage of players and every honest developer's hard work poured into the creation of the video game affected with the same lack of accountability they had from the start. Especially with officials from Ubisoft stating soon after the Crew stuff that happened that we should be more comfortable not owning our games. It screams regulation. Bringing this whole thing back to game development, you have a large platform. You have both game devs and players following and listening to what you have to say as gospel because of your history and what you're making for yourself, which is bloody cool. A lot of people would love to be in your position. What you've managed to build from yourself is nothing short of incredible. But you are kidding yourself if you believe and actively state that you've had no negative effects on the success of Stop Killing Games while actively shunning it. You claim that many developers will not be able to speak out on this topic and that you're speaking out for them, which is egregious given the exact developers you're talking about can't speak out for the initiative for the exact same reasons they can't. You're supposedly speaking on the behalf of all developers, and so no actual discussion from real world developers can happen. It's all filtered through you, making this entire conversation absolutely pointless to begin with. The direction you're going in is that of someone who is too stubborn to grow and holds others back from doing so. You are, of course, allowed to have differing opinions. You're allowed to not agree with the initiative and feel that there is a better solution. Of course you are. But there's a more productive, cooperative and less aggro way to do it than the way you've gone about it here. You say you want to help teach people how to make games, and you may be doing that, but you're also teaching people to be closed-minded. You're not helping guide a movement that you'd otherwise agree with towards a direction that could benefit from your help in a meaningful way. In other words, you're being disingenuous. But over to you now, viewer, if you live in the EU or UK, God forbid, and agree that game preservation and consumer protections are in the best interest for gamers, games dev, and all things video games, please support the Stop Killing Games movement by following the respective links in the description and signing the petition. I have just realised while filming this that the UK one has basically surpassed 100,000 signatures, which is bloody brilliant. The EU one is almost there. Let's do it, because only together can we make the industry better.